The Grand Stellar Council chamber shimmered with cold blue light that moved like slow waves across the walls. The ceiling rose so high that it seemed to disappear into shadow. Strange symbols glowed above each section of seats, marking the territories of distant star systems. The air carried a low hum from hidden machines, steady and cold. Hundreds of alien delegates filled the curved rows that circled the vast chamber. Some were tall and thin with silver skin that reflected the light. Others were broad and heavy, wrapped in layered armor that clicked softly when they moved. A few floated above their seats inside clear spheres filled with mist. Different languages whispered across the chamber, translated by small hovering devices that blinked with soft green lights. At the very center of the hall stood Earth's delegation. They looked small compared to the others. Ambassador William Hayes stood at the front. He wore a simple dark uniform with a small silver emblem of Earth on his chest. His hair was neatly combed. His hands were steady behind his back. His face showed calm control, but his eyes were sharp and observant. Beside him stood Commander James Walker. He was taller, broad-shouldered, and still as a statue. His uniform carried the markings of Earth's fleet. A thin scar ran across his left eyebrow, pale against his skin. He kept his chin lifted and his gaze forward. Dr. Emily Carter stood slightly behind them. She held a small data tablet close to her chest. Her light brown hair was tied back neatly. Her expression was composed, but her fingers pressed tightly against the edge of the device. Advisor Grace Mitchell stood at the far side, watching everything. She noticed which delegates whispered, which laughed, which leaned forward with interest. Her tablet recorded every word spoken in the chamber. A single beam of white light shone down onto the center platform. It was William's turn to speak. He stepped forward slowly. The quiet hum in the chamber lowered just enough for his voice to carry. Honored members of the Grand Stellar Council. He began in steady, clear English. The translation devices repeated his words across the hall in dozens of alien languages. Earth comes before you with respect. We request equal trade access and shared defense agreements. Humanity has expanded peacefully. We offer partnership. He paused to let the words settle. Large holographic displays appeared behind him. They showed Earth cities shining at night, human ships traveling between colonies, farms stretching across distant planets, and research stations orbiting quiet stars. Our fleets may be young, William continued, but our people are determined. We seek cooperation, not conflict. For a moment there was silence. Then a sharp sound broke the stillness. A short, clicking laugh echoed from one of the upper tiers. It was followed by another. Then another. Within seconds the chamber filled with laughter. It rolled across the curved walls like thunder. One tall delegate with dark, scaled skin leaned forward in his seat. Earth's fleet is barely space-worthy, he said loudly. His translator repeated the insult in a dozen languages. Another delegate, floating in a sphere of mist, let out a long hiss of amusement. Primitive industry, it added. Your ships use outdated drive cores. A heavy, armored representative struck the arm of his chair with a loud clang. You ask for equal standing? With that, he said, pointing one thick finger toward the hologram of a human cruiser. The laughter grew louder. Some delegates did not even try to hide their amusement. A few openly mocked the design of the human ships displayed in the projection. Others shook their heads in false sympathy. James felt his jaw tighten. His hands curled slowly into fists behind his back. He kept his eyes forward, but his breathing grew slower and deeper. Emily lowered her gaze to the tablet in her hands. Her cheeks felt warm with anger, but she forced her face to remain calm. She had worked for years on the propulsion systems they were mocking. She knew how efficient they were. She knew how hard humanity had worked to reach this point. Grace continued recording every word. She zoomed in on certain faces, noting which species seemed the most dismissive. She marked the tone of each insult carefully. William did not interrupt. He stood still and allowed the laughter to continue. After a long moment, the chamber gradually quieted. The tall, scaled delegate leaned back in his seat. Earth is ambitious, he said. Ambition without power is foolish. Another voice added, perhaps in another century humanity will be ready. A thin ripple of laughter followed that comment. William nodded once. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. We understand, he said softly. His words were simple. Come. Controlled. That seemed to surprise a few of the delegates. They had expected anger. They had expected shouting or threats. Instead, William stepped back from the center platform. James turned with him. Emily followed. Grace deactivated her recording device. No one tried to stop them. As they walked across the smooth floor of the chamber, whispers followed them. A few delegates continued to chuckle quietly. Others dismissed the humans entirely and began speaking among themselves. The massive doors at the far end of the hall slid open with a deep metallic sound. The human delegation stepped through. The doors closed behind them with a final echo. The hallway outside the chamber was long and silent. The bright blue light of the council chamber faded into softer white lighting. Their footsteps echoed against the polished floor. For several seconds no one spoke. James finally broke the silence. "We could have answered them," he said quietly. His voice carried controlled frustration. "We could have shown them the fleet projections. The defense simulations." William kept walking. "They would not have listened," he replied. Emily looked up. "They didn't even review the full data package," she said. "They decided before we finished speaking." Grace nodded. "Their decision was made long before we arrived," she said calmly. "Today was only a formality." They reached a wide viewing window that looked out over the stars. In the distance, Earth's small diplomatic cruiser floated near the massive council station. Compared to the enormous warships docked around it, the human vessel looked modest. James stared at it in silence. "It's not weak," he said firmly. "No," William agreed. "It's not." He watched as a large alien battleship slowly passed in front of their ship, blocking it from view for a moment. "They measure strength by size," William continued. "By age. By reputation. And by fear," Grace added. Emily's grip tightened on her tablet. "They think we will beg," she said quietly. William finally turned to face them. "We will not beg," he said. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We came for partnership. They chose mockery. That is their decision." James straightened. "What now?" William looked back out at the stars. "Now we go home." The four of them returned to their ship without ceremony. No council representative came to escort them. No formal farewell was offered. Inside the cruiser, the crew stood as the delegation entered the bridge. The officers watched their leaders carefully, searching for signs of defeat. William gave a small nod. "Prepare for departure," he ordered. The engines began to hum softly. As the cruiser moved away from the station, the vast structure grew smaller behind them. Bright lights from hundreds of alien ships sparkled around it like distant fireflies. Emily sat at a console and reviewed the data once more. "They underestimate us," she said. James crossed his arms. "They won't forever." Grace looked at William. "This will change Earth's direction," she said. "Yes," William replied quietly. "It will." The stars stretched into lines as the ship entered faster-than-light travel. In the quiet that followed, William allowed himself one slow breath. He did not feel shame. He did not feel fear. He felt clarity. The council had laughed. They had shown humanity exactly where it stood in their eyes. And now humanity would decide its own path. Far behind them, in the shining blue chamber, the laughter faded quickly as new matters filled the council's attention. Earth became just another small topic in a long list of discussions. But on that small ship traveling back toward a bright blue planet, for humans understood something important. Respect would never be given freely. It would have to be earned. And humanity was very patient. The rain was falling over the capital city when the delegation returned to Earth. Gray clouds covered the sky, and the tall government tower stood quiet under the storm. Inside the highest chamber, President Daniel Brooks waited. He stood near a wide window that looked out over the city lights. His hands were folded behind his back. He had already read the first summary of the council meeting, but he wanted to hear the full report in person. The doors opened. Ambassador William Hayes entered first, followed by Commander James Walker, Dr. Emily Carter, and Advisor Grace Mitchell. No one spoke at first. Daniel turned slowly to face them. His expression was calm. "Tell me everything," he said. They sat around a long table of dark polished wood. The room was private and secure. No devices were active except Grace's recorder. William explained the meeting in clear detail. He repeated the insults word for word. He described the laughter, the tone, the body language of the delegates. He did not add anger to his voice. He simply stated facts. James spoke next. He described the fleets docked around the council station. He spoke about their weapons, their size, their numbers. Emily presented the data that the council had ignored. She showed projections of Earth's energy output, industrial growth, and ship development. Grace finished with her analysis. She displayed images of the delegates who had laughed the loudest. She listed which systems held the most influence. She pointed out which minor species had remained silent instead of mocking. When they were done, the room became quiet. No one shouted. No one struck the table. President Daniel Brooks walked slowly back to the window. The rain tapped against the glass. "They believe we need them," he said calmly. William nodded once. "Yes. They believe we cannot stand alone." James leaned forward. "They believe we are weak." Daniel turned back to face them. His eyes were steady. "Are we?" James did not hesitate. "No." Emily shook her head. "Not for long." A small, almost invisible smile crossed Daniel's face. "Good," he said. Within days, quiet orders began to move across Earth and its colonies. There were no public speeches. No dramatic announcements. No angry broadcasts. Instead, contracts were reviewed. Joint research programs with council members were suspended. Human scientists working in shared alien facilities were recalled with polite messages thanking their hosts for cooperation. Trade ships were redirected. Cargo that once traveled through council-controlled routes began taking longer, independent paths. New supply lines were mapped and tested. Shared defense stations near council space were gradually evacuated. Human crews packed their equipment carefully and left without conflict. To outside observers, it looked like retreat. To Earth, it was focus. Commander James Walker stood inside a massive orbital shipyard weeks later. Sparks flashed in the distance as workers assembled the frame of a new cruiser. The metal hull stretched longer than any previous human design. James walked along a high platform, watching teams move with precision. "We are increasing production by 30%, an officer reported. "Make it 40, James replied calmly. "Shift resources from non-essential projects." "Yes, Commander." New training schedules were issued across the fleet. Simulations became longer and harder. Crews practiced emergency jumps, coordinated formations, and rapid defense drills. There were no flashy parades. Only quiet improvement. On Mars, Emily Carter stood inside a vast industrial complex. Machines moved in perfect rhythm. Robotic arms welded hull plates. Engineers monitored energy cores through glowing screens. She spoke to a group of scientists gathered around a holographic projection of a new engine design. "We need higher efficiency," she said. "Lower fuel waste. Faster recharge cycles." One young engineer hesitated. "The council said our drive systems were outdated." Emily looked at him steadily. "They are wrong." She adjusted the projection, improving the power flow pattern. "We will not copy their designs," she continued. "We will build better ones." Across distant colonies, mining output increased. Rare minerals were redirected to shipyards instead of foreign markets. Energy plants expanded. New research labs opened in quiet sectors far from council observation. Advisor Grace Mitchell worked from a smaller office filled with star maps. She did not contact the major council powers. Instead, she sent messages to smaller systems. Independent traders. Border colonies. Species that had little voice in the council chamber. Her messages were simple. Earth offered fair trade. Balanced exchange. No control. No hidden demands. At first, responses were cautious. Then curious. Then interested. Small agreements were signed quietly. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would alarm the galaxy. Back on Earth, President Brooks met with economic leaders and military advisors daily. Reports showed temporary losses. Some markets dropped. Some industries slowed. "We can reverse this if we return to council agreements," one advisor suggested carefully. Daniel shook his head. "No." He tapped the table lightly. "Dependence is weakness," he said. "Short discomfort is acceptable. Long dependence is not." Across the galaxy, the Grand Stellar Council noticed Earth's silence. At first they ignored it. Then they began to discuss it. "Humans have withdrawn from joint research," one delegate reported. "They have rerouted trade," another added. A tall representative waved a hand dismissively. "They are embarrassed," he said. "They retreat to rebuild confidence." Soft laughter followed. "They will return," another delegate said. "They have no choice." And so the council moved on to other matters. Pirate activity began to rise in outer trade lanes months later. Some of those lanes had once been monitored by shared defense stations, stations that now stood empty. Council fleets responded slowly. They had grown used to shared responsibility. On Earth, James watched reports of the growing instability. "Do we assist?" an officer asked. James folded his hands behind his back. "No." He sent a brief message through official channels. Earth was focusing on internal development at this time. No anger. No insults. Just distance. Emily's new engine prototypes completed their first test successfully. They consumed less fuel and produced stronger thrust than previous models. She stood in the control room as the test ship returned from its trial flight. "It's ready," a technician said quietly. "Good," Emily replied. "Begin full production." Grace's quiet diplomacy began to show results. Small systems started redirecting trade toward human routes. Independent captains reported fair treatment and stable contracts. Earth's influence grew, but quietly. Years did not pass. Only months. Yet the change was visible. Human shipyards were busier than ever. Colonies became more self-sufficient. Food production increased. Energy reserves expanded. On a clear evening, President Brooks stood once more at the window of his office. The storm from weeks ago was gone. The sky was bright with stars. William stood beside him. "They think we surrendered," William said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Let them." He looked up at the night sky. "They laughed at us because we asked for peace," he said. "Now we will build strength without asking." In orbit above Earth, new ships floated in silent formation. Their hulls were smooth and dark. Their engines glowed softly like distant blue fire. They were not the largest ships in the galaxy. Not yet. But they were not weak. And they were entirely human. Far away in the shining council chamber, delegates debated trade disputes and border conflicts. Earth was mentioned only briefly. "A minor adjustment," one representative said. "They will return when ready." But on Earth no one was preparing to return. Factories worked through the night. Engineers refined new weapon systems that were never announced publicly. Fleet commanders studied council tactics carefully. Grace expanded Earth's quiet network of allies. It did not look dramatic. It did not look powerful. It looked calm. It looked patient. It looked like a closed door. The council believed the door was locked from the outside. They were wrong. Humanity had closed it from within. And behind that closed door, preparation had begun. Months turned into years. The change did not happen in one loud moment. It happened slowly, step by step, shift by shift, decision by decision. Above Earth, the orbital shipyards never slept. Great metal frames stretched across space like the bones of giant creatures. Sparks flashed day and night as workers and machines shaped hull plates and locked heavy armor into place. New vessels slid out of dry dock with smooth dark surfaces and clean lines. They were not built to impress. They were built to last. Commander James Walker stood on a high command deck overlooking the largest yard in orbit. Below him, a cruiser detached from its construction arms and drifted forward under its own power for the first time. "Shield integrity?" James asked. 99% stability," an officer replied. "Engine output?" "Within projected limits." James gave a small nod. "Send it to deep-range trials." The ship moved away slowly, its engines glowing blue against the black of space. This was not the old fleet the council had laughed at. This fleet was quiet, balanced, efficient. Training became harder. Out beyond the orbit of Mars, task groups practiced live combat simulations in empty space. Ships moved in tight formations, breaking apart and reconnecting with perfect timing. Electronic warfare teams tested signal jamming and countermeasures again and again. James watched from the command carrier as two squadrons ran a high-speed interception drill. "Again," he said over the channel after they finished. A young captain responded carefully. "Sir, we already met the target time." "Then beat it," James replied. There was no shouting in his voice. Only expectation. Crews trained until movement became instinct. They drilled emergency jumps, power failures, hull breaches. Every weakness was tested. Every mistake was corrected. On the surface of distant colonies, change was also visible. On Titan, massive fusion plants expanded across the icy plains. On Mars, automated factories produced components faster than ever before. In the asteroid belt, mining stations doubled their output of rare metals. Energy production tripled within 5 years. Earth no longer relied on shared council grids or trade shipments for key materials. Supply chains became internal, secure, independent. Dr. Emily Carter stood inside a research station orbiting Jupiter. Before her floated a three-dimensional projection of a new propulsion core. Engineers surrounded her, watching closely. "If we increase field compression here," she said, adjusting the glowing model, "we reduce fuel use by 15% and increase jump stability." A technician frowned. "That would allow longer range travel without refueling." "Yes," Emily replied calmly. "That is the goal." They tested the new system on an unmanned vessel first. The ship jumped farther than any previous human craft and returned with only minor stress damage. Emily allowed herself a small smile. Communications also improved. Human ships could now maintain secure contact across greater distances without relying on Council relay stations. Encryption systems were redesigned from the ground up. Earth's signals became stronger. Harder to track. Harder to break. Advisor Grace Mitchell worked quietly from her office filled with star charts and diplomatic records. She rarely appeared in public. She did not attend council meetings. Instead, she spoke with leaders from small systems who had grown tired of being ignored. A mining colony near the edge of known space signed a direct trade agreement with Earth. A small agricultural world agreed to share food supplies in exchange for technology support. An independent transport guild chose human routes for safety and fairness. None of these systems were powerful alone. But together they formed a quiet network. Grace never promised protection. She promised balance. And Earth delivered. Then the pirate attacks began. At first, they were small raids on lightly defended trade ships. Cargo vanished. Crews were stranded. Most of the affected routes were controlled by major council members. Emergency meetings filled the Grand Stellar Council chamber once more. Reports showed that pirate groups were using advanced weapons and fast-strike ships. Council fleets struggled to respond quickly. "They are targeting our supply chains," one delegate said angrily. "We need unified patrols," another insisted. Someone mentioned Earth. "They once shared defense stations in these sectors," a representative noted. "Yes," another agreed slowly. "Perhaps we should request assistance." A formal message was drafted and sent through secure channels to Earth. On Earth, the transmission arrived in the capital. Ambassador William Hayes read it carefully in a quiet room overlooking the ocean. The message was polite. Careful. It avoided any mention of past insults. The Council requested joint operations against piracy. They emphasized shared security and mutual benefit. William closed the message window. President Daniel Brooks sat across from him. "They ask for cooperation," Daniel said. "Yes." James joined them through a secure link from Fleet Command. Emily and Grace were also connected. James spoke first. "Our patrols have detected pirate movement near our borders," he said. "They have not crossed into human space." Emily added, "Our independent trade routes remain secure." Grace studied the political tone of the message. "They are concerned," she said. "Their supply losses are growing." Daniel folded his hands on the table. "What do they expect from us?" "Immediate fleet support," James answered. "Shared operations. Shared command." Silence filled the room for a moment. William looked at each of them before speaking. "We offered partnership years ago," he said quietly. They laughed. No one argued. Daniel nodded once. "We will respond," he said. William activated the communication channel and began typing the official reply. He chose his words carefully. No anger. No sarcasm. No reminder of past mockery. The message was simple. "We are focusing on our own security at this time." He sent it. In the council chamber, the response appeared on the central display. Delegates read it in silence. "That is all?" one asked. "That is all," another confirmed. There was no insult in the message. No threat. Just distance. Back on Earth, life continued. Shipyards remained active. Training continued. Energy grids expanded. James reviewed long-range sensor data. Human defense networks now extended beyond previously mapped borders. Early warning systems detected movement far from colony worlds. Emily oversaw final tests on a new class of escort vessel designed for rapid response. It was smaller than a cruiser but faster and more agile. Grace signed another quiet agreement with a border system that had lost 3 trade ships to piracy. "We cannot offer direct intervention," she explained calmly to their leader. "But we can offer secure routes and shared technology." They accepted. Months later, pirate activity near human space dropped sharply. Rumors spread through the galaxy. Human trade routes were too well protected. Human ships were too well trained. Attacking them was not worth the risk. In the council chamber, frustration grew. "They refuse to help," one delegate complained. "They are isolating themselves," another said. A senior representative leaned back in his seat. "Or strengthening themselves," he said quietly. Far away, above Earth, a new fleet formation gathered for inspection. Rows of ships floated in precise alignment. Their hulls reflected sunlight in sharp silver lines. Shield emitters hummed softly, barely visible. James stood on the bridge of the lead carrier. "All systems report ready," an officer said. James looked out at the formation. Good, he replied. On the surface below, cities thrived without council oversight. Colonies reported stable growth. Food supplies were secure. Energy reserves were high. Earth was no longer adjusting. It was advancing. Ambassador William stood once more near the ocean as evening light turned the water gold. A young aide approached him carefully. Sir, some council members are surprised by our refusal, she said. William watched the horizon. We did not refuse, he replied softly. We chose our path. He turned back toward the city skyline. There was no anger in his heart. No desire for revenge. Only clarity. Humanity had asked for peace once. Now it stood on its own. Not loud. Not boastful. Just steady. In the silence between the stars, that steadiness was becoming strength. The crisis did not end. It grew. Pirate attacks became organized strikes. Entire cargo convoys vanished. Fuel shortages spread across several major council systems. Food shipments were delayed. Factories slowed down. Citizens began to question their leaders. In some systems, protests filled the streets. In others, local governors demanded stronger protection. The great fleets of the council were powerful, but they were slow to respond across such wide space. For the first time in many years, the council felt uncertain. Emergency meetings were called again and again inside the Grand Stellar Council chamber. The same blue light filled the massive hall, but the mood was different now. The laughter from years ago was gone. Reports appeared on large holographic displays. Trade losses increasing. Defense costs rising. Public unrest spreading. One delegate spoke with clear frustration. We cannot protect every route at once. Another added, we relied too heavily on shared systems that no longer exist. No one said Earth's name at first. Then a quiet voice from the upper tier spoke. Human trade lanes remain stable. Silence followed. They withdrew from us, another delegate said carefully. Yes, the first replied. And they built something stronger. The word stronger hung in the air. After hours of debate, a decision was made. A formal transmission was prepared. It was respectful. Measured. Very different from the tone used years before. Far away, on Earth, the message arrived in the capital. Ambassador William Hayes stood in the same office where he had once sent a short refusal. The ocean outside was calm under a bright sky. He read the transmission slowly. The council requested negotiations. They proposed reopening discussions about trade and defense cooperation. They acknowledged past misunderstandings. They expressed interest in balanced agreements. William did not smile. He forwarded the message to President Daniel Brooks, Commander James Walker, Dr. Emily Carter, and Advisor Grace Mitchell. Within hours, they gathered in the secure conference room. They are ready to talk, Daniel said. James crossed his arms. Because they have no choice. Emily studied the attached economic data. Their shortages are real, she said. Production has dropped across several sectors. Grace looked at the political language carefully. They are careful not to admit weakness, she said. But the request is clear. Daniel looked at William. Do we go? William thought for a moment. Yes, he said. But not as petitioners. Preparations began immediately. James ordered a fleet group to accompany the diplomatic cruiser. Not an invasion force. Not an aggressive formation. Just a visible presence. Modern carriers, cruisers, and escort ships moved into formation. Their hulls were dark and smooth. Their shields were strong. Their engines burned with steady blue light. When they entered council space, they did so in clear view. Not as a threat. As a fact. Inside the Grand Stellar Council chamber, the delegates waited. The blue light still shimmered across the walls, but the sound inside the hall was quiet. No whispers of amusement. No mocking tones. The doors opened. William Hayes entered first. Behind him walked James Walker, Emily Carter, and Grace Mitchell. They wore simple uniforms the same as before. No extra decoration. No display of pride. They walked to the center platform. This time no one laughed. A senior delegate with pale silver skin rose slowly from his seat. His voice was calm but careful. We welcome the representatives of Earth, he said. William nodded once. The delegate continued. Recent events have shown us that the galaxy faces shared challenges. It is possible that we may have misjudged humanity. The words were slow and deliberate. There was no apology. But there was no mockery either. William met the delegate's gaze evenly. You mistook cooperation for weakness, he replied. His voice was steady. Not loud. Not angry. The translation devices repeated his words across the chamber. Several delegates shifted in their seats. James stood behind William, silent and firm. Outside the station, his fleet held position in open space. Council sensors could see every ship clearly. They could read shield strength and engine output. They could see that this was not the same fleet they had once laughed at. Emily activated a holographic display behind them. Data filled the air above the platform. Energy output charts. Industrial growth statistics. Fleet production numbers. Secure trade routes. Our systems are stable, Emily said in clear, simple words. Our colonies are self-sufficient. Our defenses are independent. She did not exaggerate. She did not boast. She only showed facts. Grace stepped forward next. She projected a balanced treaty framework into the center of the chamber. Earth proposes equal trade access, she said. Shared defense responsibilities. Clear limits on authority. No oversight of internal human systems. The terms were simple. Equal trade. Shared defense. Mutual respect. Nothing more. Nothing less. A murmur moved through the chamber. One delegate raised a hand. These terms offer no special advantage to the Council, he said. Grace answered calmly. They offer stability. Another delegate spoke. You request equal standing. William looked around the hall. Yes, he said. Equal. Silence followed. The Council members were not used to this position. For centuries, they had guided new species into agreements that favored established powers. They had expected gratitude. Dependence. Now Earth stood before them without either. A projection from an outer monitoring station appeared above the chamber. It showed James' fleet in orbit. The ships were arranged in perfect formation. They were not charging weapons. They were not moving aggressively. They were simply there. Visible. Capable. One of the older delegates leaned forward slowly. If we accept these terms, he said, what assurance do we have that Earth will remain cooperative? William answered without hesitation. You have no assurance, he said. Just as we had none before. The honesty of the reply echoed through the hall. James finally spoke, his voice deep and controlled. We defend our space, he said. We protect our trade. If we share defense again, it will be because it benefits both sides. Emily added quietly, we do not require protection. Grace concluded, we require balance. The chamber fell into deep silence. This was no longer a meeting with a small, hopeful species seeking approval. This was a negotiation between equals. After several minutes, the senior silver-skinned delegate spoke again. The Council will review these terms, he said carefully. William inclined his head. We will await your decision. There was no rush in his voice. No desperation. The meeting paused for private discussion among the Council members. The human delegation stepped back from the center platform but remained standing. James glanced once at the large projection of his fleet outside. Everything was stable. Emily reviewed her data calmly. Grace watched the faces in the chamber, noting which delegates whispered seriously and which nodded slowly. When the Council reconvened, the senior delegate addressed the hall. The galaxy has changed, he said. It would be unwise to ignore that fact. He looked directly at William. Your terms will be considered seriously. It was not full agreement, but it was respect. William gave a small nod. That is all we ask, he said. The blue light of the chamber seemed less cold than before. There was no laughter. No mocking. Only careful thought. Outside, in silent orbit, Earth's fleet remained steady. Not as a threat. As a fact. And in that quiet balance, the galaxy began to understand something it had once ignored. Humanity had not grown loud. It had grown strong. The chamber felt different that day. The blue light still covered the tall walls. The seats were still filled with delegates from 100 systems. But the air was heavy. Careful. Quiet. The Council had reviewed Earth's terms for many hours. Equal trade. Shared defense. Mutual respect. Nothing more. Nothing less. For some delegates it seemed fair. For others, it felt like a loss of control. At last, the senior silver-skinned delegate stood again. We have considered your proposal, he said slowly. The Council is willing to reopen cooperation. William Hayes stood calmly at the center platform. James Walker, Emily Carter, and Grace Mitchell remained behind him. The delegate continued. However, certain adjustments are necessary. The word adjustments echoed softly through the chamber. William did not move. What adjustments? He asked. A new projection appeared above the floor. The first condition glowed in bright letters. Council oversight of shared defense fleets. The second followed. Limitations on the number of capital ships Earth could deploy within Council space. The third appeared. Mandatory technology sharing reviews. A quiet murmur moved across the hall. William read each line without expression. James' jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Emily looked at the fleet limitation clause and felt a cold weight in her chest. Grace observed the faces of the delegates. Some looked uncomfortable. Others watched carefully, waiting for Earth's reaction. The senior delegate folded his hands. "These conditions are reasonable," he said. "They ensure balance." William finally spoke. "Balance?" he repeated softly. "Yes," the delegate replied. "The Council must maintain stability. Independent military expansion without oversight could cause concern." There it was. Concern. Not trust. William clasped his hands behind his back. "For years," he said calmly, "the Council maintained stability without our input. Without our protection." The delegate did not answer. Another representative leaned forward. "You are stronger now," she said carefully. "That strength must be guided." "Guided?" James repeated quietly. William raised one hand slightly and James fell silent again. William looked around the chamber slowly. He met the eyes of several delegates who had once laughed at him. "We came here once before," William said. "We asked for partnership. No one interrupted. You dismissed us," he continued. "You called us weak. You believed we would always need you." The chamber remained silent. William's voice stayed calm. Simple. Clear. "We offered peace once," he said. "You laughed. We built strength instead. We do not require approval to exist." The translation devices carried his words across the chamber in every language. The senior delegate shifted in his seat. "This is not about approval," he said carefully. "It is about order." William shook his head slightly. "Order without respect is control," he replied. A faint tension spread across the hall. Outside the station, sensors detected movement. James had given no aggressive command. But human ships were adjusting position. Cruisers aligned into tighter formation. Carriers shifted slightly forward. Escort vessels moved into defensive arcs. Their engines glowed steadily like distant blue stars. Inside the chamber, a projection of the fleet appeared as Council monitoring systems displayed the change. "They are maneuvering," one delegate whispered. James finally spoke, his voice steady and firm. "Our fleet stands in standard defensive alignment," he said. Nothing more. It was true. Weapons were not powered. Shields were stable but not raised to combat level. The ships were simply organized. Visible. Ready. Emily stepped forward slightly. "Our industry does not threaten you," she said. "Our technology does not endanger you. It protects us." A delegate from a minor system spoke quietly from the upper tier. "Earth's trade routes have been stable," he said. "Their agreements have been fair." Some heads turned toward him. Grace saw it. The smaller systems were watching closely. They had seen how Earth treated partners. They had seen how the Council treated new members. The senior delegate cleared his throat. "If Earth refuses oversight," he said, "cooperation may become difficult." William nodded once. "Yes," he said. The simplicity of the answer unsettled several delegates. "You are willing to walk away?" one asked. William looked directly at him. "We already did once." The memory hung in the air. Years ago they had walked out under laughter. Now there was no laughter. Only calculation. The senior delegate tried one more time. "Consider the benefits," he said. "Access to our full markets. Joint patrol authority. Political influence." William listened patiently. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. When the delegate finished, William stood straighter. "We are not here to expand influence," he said. "We are here to exist as equals." He paused. "If that is not acceptable, then there is nothing more to discuss." The chamber fell into deep silence. No one mocked him. No one dismissed him. But no one removed the conditions either. William looked at James. It was a small movement. A simple glance. James understood. He tapped a command into the secure device at his wrist. Outside, the human fleet tightened formation once more. Engines brightened slightly as power flowed through their systems. Not charging. Not attacking. Preparing to depart. William faced the chamber one last time. "We will continue our path," he said. "If you choose balance in the future, we will listen." There was no anger in his voice. No threat. Only certainty. He stepped back from the center platform. James turned first. Emily followed. Grace gave one final calm look around the chamber, memorizing every face. The massive doors at the end of the hall opened slowly. The human delegation walked toward them. No one spoke. No one laughed. The sound of their footsteps echoed across the vast chamber. When the doors closed behind them, the echo faded into silence. Inside the hall, delegates stared at the projection of the human fleet outside the station. One by one the ships began to turn. Cruisers rotated smoothly. Carriers adjusted heading. Escort vessels formed protective rings. Then, in perfect coordination, the fleet moved away from the station. Their engines glowed like distant stars against the dark of space. They did not fire weapons. They did not broadcast threats. They simply left. In the chamber, a quiet understanding settled over the council. Earth had not begged. Earth had not compromised its sovereignty. Earth had not declared war. It had walked away. Again. A younger delegate spoke softly, almost to himself. They do not fear isolation. An older one replied, they are not isolated. Screens showed human trade routes stretching across independent systems. Defense networks extending beyond old maps. Alliances forming quietly at the edges of council space. The galaxy had shifted. Without noise. Without conquest. Without permission. Far from the station, aboard the lead human carrier, James watched the stars stretch ahead as the fleet entered faster than light travel. Course set for home, an officer reported. James nodded. In the diplomatic cruiser, William sat quietly by a window watching the distant stars. Emily reviewed new production schedules for the next generation of ships. Grace began drafting new trade offers for independent systems. No one celebrated. No one felt regret. They had given the council a choice. The council had hesitated. That was enough. Back in the Grand Stellar Council chamber, the blue light still shimmered across the walls. But something had changed. The laughter from years ago felt distant now. Small. Unwise. For the first time, many delegates understood the truth. Earth had not needed the council. The council had needed Earth. And humanity had just shown that it was strong enough to walk alone.